Welcome to another episode of the Gull-Mouth Action podcast, where we take a look at all the latest goings on at Brighton and Hove Albion, Crawley Town and Sporting Sussex. I'm Matt Pohl, and this week I'm joined by Brighton Hove Albion writers Derren and Henry Bryant, as well as Crawley Town expert Mark Dunford. Albion were held to a 1-1 draw by struggling Burnley to leave their European dreams hanging by a thread. We'll look back at the Seagulls draw at Turf Moor and bring you the latest from Crawley Town's League 2 playoff charge. You can read all the stories we were talking about with videos and pictures online at sussexworld.co.uk/sport. And you can check out other great videos on shotstv.com and Freeview channel 276. You may also be watching on latest TV, so thank you very much for tuning in. But as mentioned, as the top of the podcast, an Arianet Muric own goal spared Brighton's blushes at Burnley on Saturday. The Seagulls trailed to Josh Brownhill's 74th minute opener before the goalkeeper's catastrophic error saw the team share the points. What did you make of Brighton's performance, Derren? It did seem a bit anticlimactic.
It wasn't the best, Matt. Yeah, you're right. It was it was a poor game, two terrible goals, and it was a point that, did neither team much good, really. Brighton were trying to get their, they needed some points on the board to get their kickstart their European campaign, and Burnley needed 3 points to have any chance of avoiding the drop, and really a point for each just didn't do anybody any good, really. And the two goals, like you say, they were two errors. Carlos Baleba, who had a pretty good game for Brighton in the centre of the midfield, he's playing much more at the moment with because of the injury to Billy Gilmore, and he was actually one of the positives on the day until his short back pass to Verbruggen. As you say, Josh Brownhill sort of latched upon it, and Verbruggen came out to clear it, cannoned off Brownhill, and then into the net for a really scrappy goal. And then the poor Burnley keeper, what he was, I don't know. It's one of the worst you'll ever see from a top flight keeper. He just, I can't explain it. He just must have just not been looking at the ball, rolled under his studs and into the net from the tamest back pass possible. So yeah, 1-1, not much good. As I say, the positives mainly for me were Jacob Moder. He had another pretty good game in midfield as well. He's looking much better now as he's coming back from his knee injury. I thought Van Hecker, he played very well at the back alongside Lewis Dunk. So yeah, I would say that they were the three really. Van Heck, Moder, and Carlos Baleba, up until his mistake, were probably the positives for Brighton from a day which will be easily forgotten, I'm sure, by all. Yeah.
Well, something that's marginally less positive is that a run of only 3 victories in Brighton's last 13 league games have very much left their ambitions of repeating last season's first qualification for European football looking less and less likely. This season, Henry, started with so much optimism, and obviously they've had great adventures in Europe. But is the league season, do you kind of feel it's just petering out at the moment?
Yeah, I think so. And if you look at the last 6 games you've got the likes of Manchester City, Newcastle, an informed Chelsea at the moment, Manchester United as well that they have to face. So it's going to be really difficult for the Albion. And the way they've sort of been described, I guess, is Brighton have burst into the scene like a shaken can of Coke, but now fallen very, very flat. And I think the rush of a European tour has made it difficult to keep forming the Premier League. And another issue has been the big gamble they had in terms of transfers, and Ansu Fati has just not worked out. The hype that the club produced for him was absolutely massive, and the video went absolutely viral. No one really expected this move and thought that it was going to give Brighton and Hove Albion monumental results, but it's been, I'd have to say, a monumental failure. He hasn't really proved himself at the moment. I mean, if De Zerbi plays him in these last 6 games, great, and he does really well for us, then all is forgotten, but we'll have to see.
Sam Morton was so excited when he signed. Bless him.
Was,
yeah. I mean, we all should have been, shouldn't we? But he's been a huge disappointment.
Yeah, we thought that was going to be a sign of things to come. Brighton going forward, buying hot young talent from Europe's biggest clubs. And what have you put his failure down to? Has it just been injuries that have kind of curtailed his spell at Brighton?
Well, I think that maybe a lack of confidence, because he was sort of the star boy at Barcelona, and maybe that sort of, in the greatest respect to Brighton and Hove Albion, that sort of fall from stardom to Barcelona to Brighton, maybe he wasn't cut out for it. Maybe he sort of wasn't ready for that, and maybe sort of he had his sights set in a different way, and maybe his mentality hasn't been strong enough, like De Zerbi has mentioned, and also kept him out of the starting lineup and also the subs a few times this season because of that. So in terms of this failure, I think it's a little bit down to his mentality, bit of injuries, and maybe those two sort of playing together and sort of dampening him down and not being the player that we all hoped he'd be for the Albion so far.
Absolutely. Well, you've mentioned Roberto De Zerbi there, Henry. Speculation has raged throughout the season about where he may end up at the start of the next season and who he may be coaching, but it seems as if his future has become a little bit clearer. Darren, what's the latest on his future?
Yeah, the sort of there hasn't been any clarification, but the sort of the hints and the noises coming from the club is that there's a bit more optimism that he will be there next season, which may be down to the fact that the results have been so poor that other clubs elsewhere have thought, oh, maybe we'll just park him for a bit and see how he goes. But if that's the case, I still think it's great news for Brighton. For me, he's the best manager the club have ever had, and I think it would be a great coup if they can keep him for another season. This season's been really difficult for numerous reasons, playing Europe for the first time. There's so many injuries that they've had as well, and he just hasn't been able to name his sort of attacking players that he wanted to. I asked him after the Burnley game. It's 11 draws this season, 2 more than any other team in the Premier League, and he sort of bristled a bit at the question. He was like, well, why do you think that's the case? And so, I just said, well, I'm asking you type thing. But he was saying that it's because of injuries. He hasn't had Karamatoma, he hasn't had Solly March, and it's just been a really problematic season for him. But I think it doesn't look as though they're going to play in Europe next season. And I think that will help Brighton. The likes of Baliba, Jacob Moda, Van Hecke, Buonanotte, they've all had a season in the Premier League. They'll all be much better next season. And then if you get Karamatoma playing on top of that, if you get Solly March back, Evan Ferguson hopefully back into some form as well with João Pedro, I think having De Zerbi at the helm next season will be a reason for optimism for Brighton. So you never know. It's still a bit up in the air. If a big team makes a serious move for him and makes him their number one priority, he'll likely go. But the noises at the moment are that it's looking increasingly likely he may stay.
Derren's mentioned it there, Henry. I know that you're a Brighton fan, that he said it might be a good thing that they might miss out on Europe. Is that something that you agree with on reflection? Obviously, we've mentioned the great adventures you've had in Europe this season, but it seems to have come at a bit of a cost, hasn't it?
I think so. In terms of the way we've been playing, it really hasn't been sort of the Brighton way that we've sort of hoped for in recent games, especially. And I think the way that we have conducted ourselves in Europe has been really good. I mean, finishing at the top of the group was a really big thing for the Albion, especially when it was being called the group of death, and looking like Brighton were going to have a quick exit in some cases, especially with that first game at home to AEK Athens. So a lot of positives to take away. And yes, I think in some ways Brighton fans won't like the fact that it's going to take a small miracle for us to land in Europe for back-to-back seasons. But I think in the long-term goal for the Albion, if De Zerbi does stay, it'll be a great thing for the Albion to sort of maybe build back on. The only thing I fear as a fan is in terms of getting players to come to the club. I think that push of European football was certainly the reason Ansu Fati probably considered Brighton and Hove Albion as a club that he would go on loan to. So although that hasn't worked out, maybe other players of his maybe similar or not so much, but sort of in his range of quality, considering the club, will they consider Brighton next season? Only time will tell. But I think that's one of the key factors for a lot of Brighton fans wanting European football next season.
Well, in the here and now, Brighton are without a game this weekend owing to Man City's FA Cup commitments. The two sides will meet at the Amex on the 25th of April, which is a Thursday. Henry, do you think this break's come at a good time for Albion, a good time to recharge and potentially stop the rot?
I think so. And when you talk about the rot, I mean, that away game to Burnley, it was quite a really poor performance. And only that blunder that will end up being used in Premier League compilations for the next 10, 20 years about goalkeeper mistakes saved us there. So we're very, very lucky to be getting a point there against a really struggling Burnley side. It seems like Brighton are running out of steam and ideas at the moment. The likes of Karen Matoma that we've not got due to injury, and his creative flair, we're really missing that at the moment, I think. And that idea of, as we mentioned, the back-to-back seasons in Europe not going to happen really unless we do get some lucky results, and also lucky results elsewhere. But some positives, as Derren mentioned. I mean, you've got the likes of Jakob Moda, believer, who's been good recently, so despite his mistake last game out, especially in terms of Van Hecker as well. So some really young quality players. I think if Brighton can have this reset with this week off and get some really good results against some good sides, I think the mentality of the Albion going into their pre-season for the next season will be really greatly mounted on, and maybe will give us something to push on for.
Excellent, Brilliant. Well, thank you very much for your time, chaps. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk all things Crawley Town. Crawley Town enjoyed a mixed week, which left their League Two playoff hopes in the balance. The Reds suffered a shock 3-2 defeat home to third from bottom Colchester on Saturday. Mark, listening to the post-match interviews, especially from Dion Conroy, it sounded like a bad day at the office for Crawley Town.
It really was, a couple of the goals were just absolute shockers. You laugh about the Burnley own goal on Saturday. If you watched Colchester's second goal, I can't remember which defender it was him and Corey Adai stood there literally 5 yards apart with the ball between them. Neither of them did anything, and the striker came through, knocked it off and crossed it. Somebody scored. It was laughable. Not for Scott Lindsay, obviously, but it was for if you're not a Crawley Town fan. But it was, and Scott Lindsay said afterwards, in those moments, there was the second goal as well. Will Wright header back wasn't powerful enough, and the striker ran through to beat Corey Adai. And he said in those moments, they were unprofessional, his players. They said no professional footballer should be making those kind of mistakes. So it was a bit of a shocker, really. I mean, Colchester, they are fighting for their lives. So I didn't think it was a great shock that they lost to them, because I think it was the manner in which they lost, which really frustrated Conroy and Lindsay. But it was a bit of a surprise, really. And it was that the second of their £2 for two at £2 games with Doncaster, lost 2-0 to Doncaster, 3-2 to Colchester in front of 5,000 plus crowds. So you got to think, are these a good thing? I don't know. It is obviously a good thing. But it's the cursed games of the £2. But it was disappointing. But it was I think the manner of the goals was really, really disappointing, especially when they got it back to 1-1. You would always back Crawley to be on top again. But not good enough.
Well, Tuesday night saw Crawley come from behind to claim a 1-1 draw home to fellow playoff hopefuls Barrow. What did you make of the performance? On paper, it seems like a good point, but it's so bunched, isn't it? Playoff race.
Oh, it really is. Yeah, I mean, it was. So it's 6th versus 7th. That was, and it was. I think at the end of the day, I think both sides would be very happy with the point, because Barrow, I was really impressed with Barrow. Actually, they looked so organised, and defensively they were really good. But Crawley, they probably should have won it. They had a few chances at the end. Clyde Lolos, who's in a hot form at the moment, with his scored quite a few goals recently. He had a header, and Scott Lindsay said afterwards that he probably got too much on it. He just needed to glance it, but he got it and it just went wide. And I think it was Adam Campbell and Liam Kelly both had shots that just went wide. So they could have won it, but at the end of it, I think Lindsay was much more impressed with the performance and pleased with the response of his players, because there wasn't any silly mistakes. Barrow's goal was just a good goal across, and their big striker, Emil Aqua, header. Okay, Corey Adai, no chance at all, sort of thing. So, but it's a good point. But they could have done with winning that, just to make the last two games a bit more easy, because they're not going to be easy, those last two games.
No, absolutely not. And sticking with the Barrow game, you mentioned that Scott Lindsay was delighted with his players after the draw with Barrow, but he was left angered by a decision by officials, which means one of his key players will miss the end of the regular season. Who's the unlucky man, Mark, and how big of a miss will he be?
It's Jay Williams, who's arguably been Crawley's player of the season. He was playing in National League North last year for Brackley Town. And he's been absolutely immense for Crawley this year, playing in that sort of pivotal defensive midfielder role. And yeah, it was a really odd thing as well, because there was Jeremy Kelly fouled one of the Barrow players. Then Jay Williams came in and sort of got the ball, and he sort of collided with the player as well, because the player was on the floor. And he called Jay Williams over, the referee, and booked him. And me and one of the other journalists sat there and was like, "That was Jeremy Kelly. Why isn't he booked?" Sort of thing. And it is Jay Williams' 15th booking of the season. So it's not, it's a lot of booking. So he's sort of only got himself to blame in that sense. But it really wasn't. He shouldn't have been booked for it. But it means now the rules are he gets a 3-match ban. So he missed the last 2 games of this season. They get wiped out for the playoffs. So if they do get into the playoffs, he'll be available. But he'll then miss, I assume, the first game of next season. But yeah, I'm Scott Lindsay, because his body language when he came into the press conference was really good. He was buoyed by the team's performance and how they played. Disappointed they didn't obviously get the win. But I don't think I've ever seen a manager's body language change so much from happy to pure anger when he started talking about Jay Williams, because he was so furious with the referees. He said it beggars belief. He said it's week in, week out. The referee has an influence on the game, and it shouldn't be like that. And he said all the people at that level are not full-time referees. They're part-time referee. And he said they need to be full-time to eradicate these mistakes. And I think he's right, because I am a great defender as officials. I am a sporting official myself. I'm a umpire. But I've seen some shockers this year at the Broadfield Stadium. Some of the decisions, and it's for both sides. It's not just Crawley Town, and Scott Lindsay accepts that as well. It's just some of the decisions are just bizarre, and he's just furious, and he is going to be a huge miss.
Oh yeah,
but Lindsay said Lindsay was asked, how do you cope when you miss such a big player in the last 2 games? And Scott Lindsay simply said, "I've got good enough players who can come in." He thinks he believes in his squad, Scott Lindsay, and he said that throughout the whole season. So although it's a huge miss, I think it also gives them a chance to sort of be a bit more open as well, because when Liam Kelly was missing, he was injured for 6 weeks. Instead of having Kelly and Williams playing as those 2 defensive midfielders, they only played with 1 defensive midfielder and sort of pushed higher up the pitch. And this gives them the chance to do that again, have Liam Kelly as that pivotal midfielder. And then it gives like Ronan Darcy a chance to come in and play centre mid and just push up a little bit further. And it makes Crawley more expansive. And when they did have Liam Kelly injured, although you would always have Liam Kelly in your team, they did win games and they scored a few goals. So maybe it's not a blessing. It's not good. It's not great. And it shouldn't be that Jay Williams is missing, but it gives Scott Lindsay a chance to try something different.
And at the end of the day, Crawley still remain in the playoffs, but just 6 points separate the Reds in 7th. And I couldn't quite believe this. Bradford City, who were all the way down in 13th. Meanwhile, Doncaster, who were the informed team in the division, are 9th, but they are also just 2 points behind Crawley with a game in hand. It's going to be tight, Mark. How would you rate Crawley chances of reaching the playoffs now? Sorry,
I think they will get in it. It's going to be tight, because Doncaster, although they've got their game in hand, if Doncaster win all their 3 games, Doncaster get in the playoffs. It's as simple as that. But on Saturday, Doncaster play Barrow, which is a huge game because it affects obviously Barrow and Doncaster. Then on Tuesday, they've got Colchester away. Now Colchester are really informed. They obviously beat Crawley. They beat Grimsby last night, and by Tuesday, though, it could mean that they could be safe by Tuesday. So they might not have much to play for, Colchester, and Doncaster will have everything to play for. So who knows? And then last game of the season, they got Gillingham, who can still mathematically get in the playoffs as well. So Doncaster got 3 really tough games. But Crawley have got Sutton, who can still get relegated, who can still survive, but likely to go down. And Grimsby Town, who will probably have nothing to play for on the final day. So I think Crawley would be disappointed if they didn't get at least 4 points from those 2 games. And I can see Doncaster. They've been in such great form. Remember, they were 19th when they beat Crawley on Good Friday. They were 19th, and now they're 2 points off the playoffs. Incredible. But I think they will drop points. So it is still sort of in Crawley's hands, and I think they will just do it, especially with the teams they're playing.
Yeah, we're going to combine the score predictions with Crawley's trip to Sutton. Mark, you mentioned the plight that Sutton are in underneath at the moment. Surely Crawley have to win, don't they? There is no ifs or buts about it. Crawley have to win.
They do. Crawley have to win. If they lose and then all the other results go against them, then it makes that final game of the season so tough. But they have to win, but so do Sutton. So it's not going to be easy. I think they said last night Crawley have nearly sold 1,000 tickets for the game, so it's going to be a great atmosphere there. It is a local derby, and we spoke to Danilo Orsi after last night. He got his 20th goal of the season, by the way, last night, which is a great achievement. He was saying these are the kind of games you want to play in. Local derby, both sides, one side fighting for their lives, one side looking to get in the playoffs. So it's going to be I think it's going to be a really, really tough game, but I think Crawley will have enough to edge it. I think that the attitude of the players, they still all seem quite relaxed. There don't seem to be much nerves. I think they can just edge it, and I think it'll be very tight and it'll be nervy, but it'll be 2-1 to Crawley. I'm going for
2-1 to Crawley. Derren, how do you see this one at Sutton going then?
Well, yeah, like you say, it's going to be such a tough local derby as well. I'm with Mark. I think Crawley are going to get the job done. I think I'm going to go for an optimistic 2-0. I think.
Oh, an optimistic 2-0. Henry, do you share in our optimism that Crawley are going to get it done at Sutton?
I'm not going to play devil's advocate. I feel like yes, it will be a really tough game, and they are really struggling, Sutton. And I feel like if Crawley are able to pick up some form and able to turn the tide and maybe get the job done early, I think they could be something like a 2-1 score with them getting 2 goals early and sort of holding on till the end.
And finally, for you, Mark, I've got a very quick question, and I want the first name that comes into your head. You've mentioned it earlier in the podcast. Who has been your Crawley player of the season?
Oh, God. I think it probably is Jay Williams, just because of where he came from, and he's suddenly become like the first name on the team sheet. Him or possibly Will Wright. I think Will Wright's been really good for Crawley this year.
Can they expect a Mark Dunford award in the post, is what they're probably all waiting to hear?
Well, the Crawley Town award ceremony is the day after the final game of the season, April 28th at Lingfield Racecourse. I will be there presenting an award on behalf of the Crawley Observer, so I don't want to give too much away yet. So the other players, Liam Kelly, Danilo Orsi, there's plenty of players. Clydie Lolos even. Corey Adai has been brilliant. So there's plenty of names in that hat.
Well, let's hopefully they can cap a great season with their spot in the playoffs and maybe promotion. Thank you very much this week's chaps. You can catch up with all the latest sports news covering everything we've talked about today at sussexworld.co.uk/sport. And you can watch more excellent videos on shotstv.com and Freeview channel 276. Thank you very much for listening and or watching, and we will see you all next week.